Utkarsh from India. Chris Jericho is my favorite wrestler, and seeing as how he won Wrestler of the Year in the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Awards, I think he is one of the top 10 wrestlers of all time in terms of mic and ring work. What do you think about the Observer Awards, and do you think Jericho deserves a place in the top 10 greatest of all time? Again, this is as good of a place as any to just give my quick thoughts on the Observer Awards. I did see them. When I got this question, I figured I'd talk about it here. I'll get to your Jericho question, but first, for those who missed it, for those who care, these were the winners from the key categories. And remember, Dave Meltzer does not assign awards to people. These categories were voted on by the readers of the Observer. And part of that readership are wrestlers and people who are in the business. So it's not just fans. This is voted on by them, not by Dave. Wrestler of the Year for 2019 was Chris Jericho. He edged out Okada by a few hundred votes, and Will Ospreay, he came in third. Ospreay was my Wrestler of the Year pick for 2019. Just the quality of the matches that he had with Tanahashi and Okada and Kota Ibushi, Shingo Takagi, Lance Archer. I mean, the list goes on. It was incredible. He put together an incredible body of work in 2019. I will not argue, though, with Jericho. You can have Jericho as your choice for number one. That's fine. I think that's makes sense. Jericho's a worthy choice. Adam Cole was the only WWE affiliated name on the list at number 5. Jon Moxley, he spent his first few months of the year with WWE, but he was on the list. I think he came in number 9. I didn't jot down his spot, but I wouldn't really count him as a WWE guy last year. Lucha Bros won for Tag Team of the Year. New Japan won for Promotion of the Year, followed by AEW at number 2 and WWE at number 3. Dynamite wins for Best Weekly Wrestling TV Show, followed by NXT at number 2 and NWA Power at number 3. No Raw or SmackDown anywhere to be found in the top 10. And I say good, because even though we're seeing improvements now on Monday Night Raw, there's signs of life, there's signs of improvement so far this year. Monday Night Raw was largely a shit show in 2019. So, good. Does not belong in the top 10. Match of the year was Will Ospreay against Shingo Takagi in the Best of the Super Juniors finals. That was my match of the year as well. Tanahashi Omega from Wrestle Kingdom was number 2, and Cody versus Dustin from Double or Nothing came in number 3. Johnny Gargano and Adam Cole from TakeOver Brooklyn was number 5. Walter against Tyler Bate from TakeOver Cardiff was number 8. I had those at number 2 and number 3, respectively, on my list. Not a single WWE main roster match made the top 10. I think I had 2 on mine. Daniel Bryan and Kofi Kingston from WrestleMania 35, and the Men's Elimination Chamber match for the WWE Championship. King Corbin wins for Most Overrated by an overwhelming margin. Almost 600 votes separated King Corbin at number 1 from the Monday Night Messiah in the number 2 spot. Bray Wyatt was number 3 for Most Overrated. Most Underrated winner was Chad Gable. And I hope Johnny Gargano understands the fate that awaits him when and if he ever hits the Raw or SmackDown roster. He'll also get the Shorty G name, so Vince McMahon can put them together as a tag team. He can call them Shorty G's. Jungle Boy wins for Rookie of the Year. Kevin Kelly wins for Best TV Announcer. Well deserved. With Excalibur at number 2 and Tony Schiavone at number 3. Corey Graves, Michael Cole, and Beth Phoenix take the number 1, number 2, and number 3 spots for Worst TV Announcer. This was a list that also included Josh Matthews and Alex Marvez. So I disagree strongly with those rankings. And I know how annoying Cole can be. I know how annoying Corey Graves can be. Beth Phoenix isn't great, but she's learning. You cannot put them at number 1, number 2, and number 3 on a list that has Josh Matthews and Alex Marvez. You can't do that. Most disgusting promotional tactic goes to WWE continuing to do business in Saudi Arabia, second straight year. Last year they won the award for the doing business with them after the Khashoggi murder. Monday Night Raw won for worst TV show, well deserved. Worst match of the year was The Fiend against the Messiah at Hell in a Cell. Number 2 was Goldberg against The Undertaker at Sweet Saudi Money. I agree with that. I know some people disagreed. They said, how could Goldberg Undertaker not be number 1? I agree with it. The reason being, Undertaker and Goldberg was not a match that mattered. There was no title on the line. There was nothing at stake. There was no real value or importance to it other than just taking 2 big names and putting them in a match together. And it was shorter. Look, Goldberg Undertaker was probably 6, 7, 8 minutes of shit. Whereas Fiend and the Messiah was 18 minutes of shit. I'll take 8 minutes of shit over 18 minutes of shit. Best gimmick was The Fiend, Bray Wyatt. Worst gimmick was Shorty G. But interestingly, The Fiend was number 3. So you gotta love The Fiend winning for best gimmick, but coming in the top 3 for worst gimmick. And finally, WWE wins for worst promotion of the year. Ring of Honor was number 2, and Impact Wrestling was number 3. There was a lot to hate about WWE last year. A lot to like, but a lot to hate. But Ring of Honor had a real bad period there for a good chunk of the year. And you could go either way. If not number 1, then number 2. I probably would have put them in number 1, to be honest with you. I mean, and it's not just all the embarrassing stuff that came out at the end of the year, but just the way that the company fell off into the abyss for much of last year. You almost forgot that they even existed. That's all they were doing. They were existing. Not generating any real excitement. Numbers, like attendance was down. Now they've locked up some big names. They seem to be reviving their relationship with New Japan. Their fortunes could be turning around a little bit. But in 2019, it's not a good year for Ring of Honor. And that's a year where they ran their first ever show at Madison Square Garden. It was not a good year for Ring of Honor. Now back to Utkarsh's question about Chris Jericho. Is Chris Jericho in the top 10 greatest of all time? It is subjective. Everybody has their own list. I gave it some thought. Jericho falls 1 spot short of my top 10 list when I map out all the names that I feel, for me personally, my personal top 10. Now remember, I grew up just after, that Bruno era. Bruno's not on my list. If you grew up in that era of Bruno Sammartino as the dominant champion and headlining all the big matches at Madison Square Garden, if you grew up in the Northeast, and so guys like Bruno and Superstar Graham and those are the guys that you grew up with, your list is going to look very different than mine. You're likely to have people like him or Graham or maybe Bob Backlund or somebody possibly in your top 10. It's not in my top 10. This is not ranked. This is my top 10 in no particular order other than maybe generational. Hulk Hogan is number 1. Randy Savage, number 2. Again, forget the numbers. I'm just listing them out. Hogan 1, Randy Savage number 2, Ric Flair number 3, Bret Hart number 4, Shawn Michaels number 5, Undertaker number 6. As much for the second half of his career than the first half. Number 7, Stone Cold Steve Austin. Number 8, The Rock. Number 9, Kurt Angle. And number 10, Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar makes my top 10. Chris Jericho would be number 11. So for me, he just falls 1 spot short of that top 10 list. And look, Jericho may yet get there in a few more years. He ain't done yet. Actually, he may end up taking Undertaker's spot. If Undertaker hangs around for much longer and starts to really tarnish his legacy, I may boot him from the list. But Jericho may yet get there in a few more years. He's already accomplished a ton of stuff outside of WWE. In Japan and AEW. But in WWE alone, the matches that he has had with Chris Benoit, even the skits. I will always remember the bit that he did on SmackDown in 2000. It was in the build-up to SummerSlam, where he mocked up these images of Benoit riding in a boat, Benoit with a goat, Benoit as a blushing bride, he was Dr. Seuss during that promo. It's great. The musical chair segment in 2005, I think maybe it was, or 4, I forgot what year it was. Probably 4, in Winnipeg. Again, one of my all-time favorite segments on Raw. I just thought it was very entertaining, and he was a big part of that. You look at the matches that he had with the Benoits and Shawn Michaels, their feud back in 2008. The very next year, another classic feud. A series of pay-per-view matches against Rey Mysterio. You know, the guest host era. The stuff with him and Bob Barker on that one episode of Raw. It's classic stuff. Probably the best guest host, by the way, they ever had was Bob Barker. Jericho was part of a lot of great moments, a lot of great classic matches. And now he has found success outside of WWE. If he's not top 10 worthy, he's top 15 all time for sure in my book. But I have him at number 11 on my own list. People who aren't old enough to have grown up with, Hogan and Savage in the Mega Powers era, you're less likely to have those two on your list. If you didn't grow up during the early to mid-90s, the New Generation era, you're likely to maybe not have Bret Hart on your list. Or Shawn Michaels, although Shawn Michaels had this whole second half of his career that Bret really didn't have. But you may be less likely to have at least someone like Bret on your list. Kurt Angle, he's a machine. He could do it all. He could be serious. He could do comedy. Kurt is one of the very best ever. Got to be top 10. Brock Lesnar, when he first came in, and now, even pre-UFC, but especially post-UFC, he still brings a legitimate feel to his matches that nobody else does. His matches, to me, even the ones that maybe sometimes do end up being boring, you wish he would do more, it goes 90 seconds. Not every match he's in is a winner. But even those matches, when he comes out, gets the big entrance, and he's bouncing up and down in the ring, I mean, it brings a certain feeling to those matches that nobody else on that roster has. He's got something that nobody else has. But all of those guys, to me, they squeeze Jericho just outside my top 10. And you can chime in with your top 10. But I was thinking about this, and I was saying, I wonder, does Jericho fall into my top 10? I really had to think about it. And I just mapped out the first 10 names that really felt to me like these are my top 10. And he fell just outside of that. Him, Cena, they just fell outside the top 10 for me. But chime in and let me know what you think. What does your top 10 look like? I bet it looks different than mine. And that's okay, because it's a subjective thing. There is no one definitive answer about who the top 10 of all time is. It's going to be different no matter who you are, based on your age, and based on when you became a wrestling fan. I don't expect somebody who just started watching wrestling 2 years ago, during the PG era here, to necessarily have Randy Savage on their list, which almost sounds sacrilegious. Randy Savage had a lot of classic matches in WWF with a great story wrapped around them. Steamboat, the whole injury story heading into their match at WrestleMania 3, the Mega Powers angle with Hogan heading into WrestleMania 5, the retirement match with Warrior at WrestleMania 7, the She Was Mine Before She Was Yours story with Liz and Ric Flair heading into WrestleMania 8. The thing I loved about Savage was he didn't just go out and have great matches. There was a story wrapped around them, and they just happen to be some of the best stories in the history of that company. But just for his charisma and his promos alone, he makes the top 10 for me. There's nobody else like him. If you didn't grow up with him, you only know him from the video game. And I feel badly for you people, by the way, who didn't grow up with Randy Savage and don't really know a whole lot about him outside of maybe seeing him in a video game or something. Sucks for you, because he was one of the best to ever do it. So it's all a matter of perspective on these things.